What if everything you thought you knew about the biblical plagues was wrong? Imagine waking up one morning to find your city's water turned to blood, fish dying in the streets, the stench choking the air. Then come frogs, in your bed, in your food, swarming every crevice of your home. Next, a swarm of insects so dense it blocks out the sun. Now, imagine this wasn't just nature gone rogue. What if this was divine, intentional, a calculated supernatural assault? We like to think we've moved beyond the ancient world, but if a similar chain of disasters hit today, economic collapse, pandemics, ecological catastrophes, how would we interpret them? As random misfortunes, or something more ominous? The biblical plagues weren't just bedtime stories from Sunday school. They were acts of terror, strategic, divine strikes against an empire that defied God, and their implications echo far beyond the borders of ancient Egypt. These are stories of power, control, judgment, and liberation. Today, we're peeling back the layers of these infamous events, not just to tell you what happened, but why it matters. Because once you truly understand what was unleashed during the 10 plagues, you'll never see divine intervention the same way again. Echoes of devastation. A deeper look at each plague's impact. Let's begin with the first 3 plagues. At first glance, they almost seem like nature's hiccups. But there's more here. Something sinister. Plague 1. Water to blood. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline. The river wasn't just a water source. It was a god to them. Hapi, the deity of the Nile, was worshipped as a bringer of life and fertility. Then, suddenly, it flows red. Not symbolic red. Blood. Dead fish, rotting in the heat. The economic implications alone? Catastrophic. Fishermen ruined. Trade halted. Drinking water contaminated. The smell? Intolerable. But deeper still, this wasn't just pollution. This was psychological warfare. The message was chilling. Your gods can't save you. Plague 2. Frogs. At first, frogs might seem comical, harmless, but in overwhelming numbers, a living nightmare. Frogs were also sacred, symbols of life and resurrection. The goddess Heket was often depicted with a frog's head. Egyptians would not kill frogs. But what happens when your homes, your food, even your beds are infested with sacred animals you can't touch? When the symbols of blessing become your curse? Imagine the helplessness. The sacred turned sickening. Plague 3. Gnats, or lice. No warning. No chance to prepare. Suddenly the dust of the earth turns into biting insects. Unlike frogs or blood, this plague attacked the body directly. Pain, itching, invasion of the skin. Even the Egyptian magicians couldn't replicate it. They admitted, this is the finger of God. This moment is pivotal. The enemy is no longer physical. It's spiritual. The plagues are escalating, and Egypt is just beginning to feel the fear. The unraveling. Plagues as divine strategy and power play. As we move to the next plagues, the tone shifts. These aren't just random events. They're precise, surgical, targeted. Plague 4. Flies. Unlike gnats, these weren't minor nuisances. Swarms of aggressive, biting flies. But something new happens here. Distinction. The land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was untouched. This wasn't just destruction, it was control. The flies were likely a direct affront to Uachet, a fly-headed deity. Once again, God flips the symbols of power. Egypt's protectors become helpless. Plague 5. Death of livestock. Cows, donkeys, camels, gone. Economic collapse. Agricultural ruin. But more than that, Egypt's worship of Apis, the bull deity, was shattered. What happens when your gods die in the fields? This plague wasn't just physical, it was theological. A direct assault on Egypt's spiritual identity. Plague 6. Boils. No one was safe. High priests, Pharaoh's court. Every man, woman, and child covered in painful boils. Priests couldn't perform rituals. Ceremonial cleanliness? Destroyed. The religious structure of Egypt crumbled. The gods of healing, Thoth, Isis, were silent. This was divine dismantling of Egypt's cultural DNA. and Pharaoh, still unmoved. But his people were beginning to break. The apex of judgment, darkness, death, and deliverance plague. 7. Hail and fire. A storm like no other. Hail mingled with fire, unnatural, apocalyptic. Egypt's crops were devastated. The god Nut, sky goddess, failed. The agricultural cycle disrupted. Desperation set in. For the first time, Pharaoh admitted guilt. But still, no release. Plague 8. Locusts. What the hail didn't destroy, the locusts devoured. The entire food system wiped out. The psychological toll? People cried out, "Egypt is ruined." And they weren't wrong. This was famine, chaos, breakdown of every societal system. Plague 9. Darkness. 3 days of utter blackness. No light, no fire, not even a flicker. This was more than physical darkness, it was symbolic. Ra, the sun god, was Egypt's chief deity. And now, silence. Darkness so thick it could be felt. It was the death of divine hope, the end of Egypt's spiritual light. And yet, Pharaoh still refused. Until Plague 10, death of the firstborn. This is it, the final blow. The plague was universal, no household untouched. From Pharaoh to the prisoner, from the palace to the fields, even animals were affected. This was no longer just a theological statement, this was judgment. And finally, Pharaoh broke. The Israelites were free. But at what cost? Enduring relevance. Why these ancient horrors still resonate today. So what do we do with these stories today? Literal history, symbolic narrative, apocalyptic warning? The truth might be somewhere in between. Whether you see the plagues as real events, layered metaphors, or divine theater, they raise eternal questions. What does divine justice really look like? Why does suffering precede freedom? Is judgment a punishment or a pathway? In an age of pandemics, climate disasters, and moral collapse, are we seeing modern echoes of ancient plagues? The biblical plagues weren't just about punishing Egypt. They were about unveiling truth, unmasking false gods, breaking chains. They were a message. The Creator is not silent. He intervenes, He judges, He liberates. The divine reckoning. Forget the cartoons and sanitized stories. The plagues were a reckoning. A confrontation between a man who thought he was a god and the God who made the universe. A power play that left a superpower in ruins and a nation of slaves walking into freedom. These aren't just ancient myths, they're mirrors, warnings, revelations. Because maybe the real horror isn't just that these plagues happened, but that they could happen again. So we're left with one final question. When the divine speaks through devastation, are we listening? If this episode challenged the way you see the Bible, share it with someone. Let's talk about the parts of Scripture that aren't easy, that aren't comfortable, but that might just hold the deepest truths. Like, comment and tell us, which plague struck you the hardest and why? Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and know what you believe. Know more. Be more.